Like to call to order the Auctioneer Advisory Board, and it is 10:02 a.m. on the 13th of October. I'd like to introduce or roll call introduction, new board members and certification of a quorum. Annalika, do we have a quorum?
I'm going to do a roll call real quick, Mr. Schroeder.
Pardon?
I'm going to do a roll call.
Okay.
Mr. Rick Stroud, presiding officer.
Here.
Mark Schrader. Mr. Donald Nixon.
I'm here.
Mr. James Beasley.
I am here.
Mr. Martin Pesink.
Here.
And Mr. Justin Adcock.
I'm here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the board members to mute their mics at this time. I'd like to introduce some new board members. Mark Schrader, James Beasley, Martin Pesink, and Douglas E. O'Mixon is our public member. Thank you guys for joining us. Moving right along, I'd like to get into the next subject, video teleconference training, and call on Miss Mary Winston, please.
Good morning, board members. Mary Winston, TDLR. And thank you. Most of you, I think, have had our internal training where we've gathered several boards together and conducted training. And we've also done some training, not with this group, but with other groups one-on-one, because when we have things in the background working well, we can put on a good meeting. Just a few things today. This meeting is being conducted by video conference. The public is watching via live stream, and persons who signed up to make public comment would have a chance to do so later in the meeting. However, on this meeting today, we do not have anyone who signed up for public comment timely. There was a cutoff point so we could get them incorporated into the system for the meeting. It's being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Here are some tips to make sure we have a successful meeting. Keep your microphones muted until you'd like to speak. Please put all phones on silent and turn off any other sources of noise in your workspace. When you're speaking, chirps and chimes can take away and interfere with everyone hearing what you're saying. Please also be cognizant of fidgeting around. I'm a hand talker. I know other people are hand talkers and you wave, and I have this background here. And sometimes if you have those backgrounds, your body will literally disappear into the background, but it can be disconcerting for those who are watching. State your name before you begin to speak. Raise your hand if you would like to speak. This platform, along with several others, does have a raise hand feature that utilized normally. However, our presiding officer has plenty to do, and our folks in the back are making sure everything is going well. So if you'd like to speak, we're going to do this elementary school style. We're going to raise our hands where it's viewable, and then Mr. Stroud will acknowledge you and you can speak at that time. It's just become the simplest thing we've done. I asked Anna this morning, we had a training at 7 a.m. and you know, how would we do that? Raise hand, because there are other ways, but it takes away from the timing of the meeting. The presiding officer will call on you when he sees your hand, and you will then announce your name and speak. During this meeting, as you saw at the beginning, we will take roll call votes on any action necessary. That is another thing that works very well while we're all sitting in our little Brady Bunch boxes. If Angelica simply calls a name, you unmute yourself, vote your conscience, and remute yourself. We'll gather the votes that way. If you have any problems connecting during the meeting, try to let the presiding officer know. We have staff working in the office to assist you with connectivity issues. Stay on camera during the meeting, even if you're not speaking. This is is good because we are conducting a public meeting and we need to see everyone involved. If you need a recess, let the presiding officer know. Raise your hand visibly on camera. Let him know you need a recess. I'm sure Mr. Trout would have no problem granting that request. If you get inadvertently disconnected from the meeting, rejoin it using the same link you used to initially join the meeting. As I said a moment ago, we've had about 17 of these so far. And using this medium, we know that we may have a few awkward moments, some minor blips. No worries, we will deal with them in real time. We'll take a small recess if necessary. These things are anticipated and it's okay. We adjust. We go through each agenda item and we take care of everything that we need to act on. I want to thank everyone for taking their time out today to participate in this meeting. Thank you so much, board. We do appreciate it, and thanks to the public who is watching. That's my presentation, Mr. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Like to move on to our next agenda item is approval of minutes from October the 15th, 2018 meeting. I'd like to give the members just a couple minutes to look over them before we move to approve.
Mary Winston, TDLR, and Mr. Stroud, after approval of the minutes,
Yes,
when the
ma'am.
board has had a chance to take a look at everything, we want to make sure we allow Ms. Jessica Escobar to do the training under D.
Oh, did I miss
You're-
D? I am so sorry.
You are running the show. You changed it up, and that's okay.
I
We're
did
going to
not
do
mean
it
to leave
all.
her out. Thank you.
Well, okay.
Oops. Everybody had a chance to look at those? All right. Is there a motion to approve? Okay. Douglas O. Mixon. has a
Mr.
motion to
Stroud,
approve.
since you and I think we're the only board members who were present at that meeting, I feel compelled to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. A second? Somebody give me a second on the motion to approve the last minutes?
A motion.
Okay. The second, who made that motion, please?
This is Justin Adcock.
Oh, hey, Justin, thank you. Justin Adcock made the second motion. And Helica?
All right. Mr. Rick Stroud, presiding officer.
Yes.
Mr. Mark Schrader,
Yes, Mark Schrader.
Mr. Douglas Old Mixon,
Yes,
Mr. James Beasley. I believe that was a yes. Mr. Martin Pesink
Yes.
and Mr. Justin Adcock.
Yes.
Your motion passes, Mr. Stroud. You may continue.
Thank you. Let's back up to item D, training for the advisory board members. Ms. Jessica Escobar, I apologize for skipping you a minute ago.
No problem. Good morning, members. My name is Jessica Escobar, and I'm going to do training with y'all this morning. You'll just give me a moment and I'll open this up. So good morning. I know we've got several new members on the board. We're just going to do some board training this morning. And go over a few things. We're going to be going over the Open Meetings Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, and the Public Information Act. So for some of y'all, this is going to be a refresher, or if you're on another board or have served in any other position, you may be familiar with this. But if not, this is going to be a quick and easy training, and we'll get you back to your board meeting. So we'll start with the Open Meetings Act because this is what we're doing. The purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to make sure that we have an open and transparent government and have meetings that are accessible to the public. So the primary purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to make sure that governmental bodies like yours have meetings that are available to the public, accessible, they are open, and that there is public notice for those members of the public so that they know when and where those meetings are happening and what those meetings are going to be, what will be discussed at those meetings. The Open Meeting Act is primarily established and construed so that those meetings are in favor of open government. So what are the things that you need to have as part of the Open Meetings Act? One of the main things is quorum. So you've got to have a majority of your members. So basically 50% plus one. And these are set, the number of members is set in statute. So you've got to have 50% plus one in order to have a quorum of the board. And so that is what you have to be able to take any official actions. If there are less than that number of members present, you can meet and have discussions, but there can be no official actions taken during that time. And during that time, you can have deliberations. Basically, any time when the board, members of the board are meeting and they're talking by in person or verbally, the way we are now, virtually, or in writing, that is a deliberation or a discussion. And meetings can occur at any time. It doesn't have to be the way we're meeting now. It can be any time that a governmental body gets together and has those discussions and talks about public business or policy. Notice is required as part of the Open Meetings Act. We need to know when and where the public meeting will be and the subject of each meeting. So TDLR provides this notice in the form of an agenda, and we post that meeting notice with the Texas Secretary of State. We file that with them 7 days in advance of the meeting, and we also post it online on our website and on the Secretary of State's website. We are confined to what is posted on that agenda. So what is on the agenda is all you all can discuss. Anything that goes outside of that, we are limited and we cannot discuss that, but it can be moved to another meeting date. So what happens when you're at a social function? You all may be at an event, or you may be at one place where everybody is together. Are you in a meeting? Are you potentially violating Open Meetings Act if you start talking about things? Well, there's a couple of things to consider. You can certainly meet together at the same place at the same time. But once you start discussing items that can potentially range into business, then you do risk having discussions and being a quorum of the members and potentially having Open Meetings Act violations. So some things that you've got to remember as part of the Open Meetings Act. There are situations when you could become a quorum, and you've got to be considerate of what things that you're discussing together outside of this context of an open meeting. You don't want to risk a walking quorum. So what is the walking quorum? That's when there's less than your quorum. Fewer than that 50% plus one, get together and start talking about official business of the board. And you get that group together. That is what a walking quorum becomes. And you may have it where there's less than the quorum. You have your couple of members that start discussing something, but then a couple more members become involved, and now you have a walking quorum. So for example, you may have a 5-member board. A couple members start engaging in phone calls. They just email with each other, but then one of the members forwards on to somebody else. Now you have a walking quorum because now you've hit that 50% plus one. So how can you have a walking quorum? You may not be having an actual meeting, but you may have set up a conference call. You have a video conference like we're meeting. You may just be meeting in the hall to discuss something, or you may be having a dinner, or now, as we're in a virtual time, you may be having emails or texting with each other. Another unique issue we have is with Twitter and Facebook. Those are platforms where you may not even anticipate Open Meetings Act violations, but you may post something on Facebook asking a question about a topic, and then you have other members of the board that start chiming in, and essentially you could have a discussion on board business that you never intended to have. So what are some best practices to avoid that walking quorum? Meet in your small groups. Don't meet in the larger groups and start discussing board business. If you're emailing or texting, do that individually. Address them individually to each members. You don't want to create posts on social media where you can potentially address board business. Another thing is you need to avoid polling members. So if you have a question and you're thinking about board business, but you send a poll, you send a question out to each members, you've now done what's called polling, and you're essentially conducting an informal vote on that issue with each member. So what are some guidelines for an open meeting? You're limited, like I said, to those specific topics that are on the agenda. So anything that goes outside of that, we cannot discuss it. We do have a public comment portion on each meeting, and the public can speak on anything they choose to. It's not limited to what we have on the agenda. However, you cannot respond to those topics. So they may be speaking on something that's outside of the agenda. You can accept and appreciate the comments, and if we need to respond, we can respond at a later date. So just in a nutshell, to avoid violating any notice provisions, we need to limit our discussions, avoid going off topic. And you'll hear, usually Mary will chime in and she'll say, hey, we're going off topic, members. Let's set that for another time. And we'll make sure that we get that on the agenda. And we cannot discuss things that are raised by the public. And we'll make sure that we get that and set up another meeting. So what can happen if there are violations of the Open Meetings Act? Well, an interested person, so often it could be the media or somebody affected by a decision that's made in a meeting, they could go to court and have that action stopped. Another option is criminal penalties. There can actually be criminal penalties against the members and fines. So those are some things that can happen. So don't violate the Open Meetings Act. These are some resources for y'all, and these will be sent by Angelica if you haven't gotten them already. If you want to take a look, there's some training videos, handbooks, those are for y'all. Administrative Procedure Act, what is that? That's basically rulemaking. The purpose of the Administrative Procedures Act is to establish those minimum standards that are necessary for state agencies to follow related to rulemaking. And this ensures that the public has an opportunity to participate and guarantees that transparency. And that's kind of bottom line in all of these discussions we're having today, transparency for the public to be involved in government. So what is a rule? A rule is a statement of general applicability. That sounds so government, right? So it's basically something that implements and interprets the law, or it's describing the procedure or practice of the agency. It applies to everybody. It's not specific to just one person, to you, to me. It applies to everybody, to that class of people that the agency is regulating. And so we put that out. It's not just in internal management. It's not just affecting a certain person. Like I said, it's everybody. We can either create new rules, we can amend existing rules, or we can repeal certain rules if we feel that they are not achieving the goals that we need them to do. So how can we have rulemaking? Why do we do rulemaking? Well, as we're going to discuss later on this morning, we can have rulemaking in response to legislative changes. The advisory boards, you all are the source of our rulemaking. You may see something that we need to address, and so that's one of the reasons. Our staff may see something within program that they may bring something to us and say, we need a change. This is not working for our stakeholders, or this is not working well within program. We need to make a change. We also have a 4-year rule review where we take a look at all of our rulemaking and all of our rules and determine, are these working for us? We take our stakeholder input. And we also have rule petition. So what is a rule petition? So anybody that's any interested person can come to TDLR and request that we adopt a rule. So who is an interested person? Somebody that lives in Texas, or a business located in Texas, or a governmental subdivision, or a public or private organization that is not a state agency, but is located in Texas. They can bring a petition and we can review it. So this is a long chart to explain our rulemaking process here at TDLR. Basically, the bottom line is to say we are very interested in public input. So how does this work? We initially start with our rule ideas. This can be with our TDLR staff, and the concepts begin with them, our GC staff, people like me. We begin the drafting, and then we send our rules over to the governor's office. In there, we've communicated with our staff, with our work groups. We bring them to you all. We bring them to our advisory boards. So there's a lot of opportunity for input. The rules may get tweaked during that advisory board. So you all may give us input and say, this is great, let's go. Or may say, you know what, this doesn't work for us. This doesn't work for our members. Let's go back to the drawing board. And we do that. And so that's the first stab at it. If you say go forward, then we do that. And then we send those rules out to the Texas Register, and those are filed and published, and we take public input. So at that point, we'll get, we have a 30-day comment period, and we take the public's input. And at the end of that time, we review all of those comments. If we get anything and we say, hey, those are some good comments, we take those back to staff and say, hey, this worked, this didn't work, what can we do to make changes? We bring that back around to you all. It's important to share all of those comments with you all so you can take those things into consideration. At that time, again, if we need to go back to the drawing board, we do that. And then if those rules are approved, we bring them to the commission. So there's another chance for public input. Those go onto their agenda. And so if the public wants to comment, they have that opportunity again. And then at that time, the commission will make the recommendation to adopt those rules. So it's very important for us to take the input of the public, the stakeholders, staff, and you all to help us build those rules. We also have the rule review process. This is the opportunity for us to evaluate our rules every 4 years. Every single program goes through this rule review process, and we put out our notice of intent to review in that Texas Register, and this is through the Secretary of State. There's 30 days for the public to review and comment, and they can say, hey, these rules are great. I have these issues with the rules. We'll go through their review comments, and we'll make recommendations again to the commission. They'll review those, and then they make their final comments, and they'll either say, yes, these are great, let's readopt the rules, or they'll give us their input, and we'll make those changes, make the recommendations to change them. So here's your quick handbook. Take a look at the rules and go through there. Public Information Act. What is the Public Information Act? Some of y'all may be familiar with it. You may have filed a public information request, or you may not. Sorry about that. So the Public Information Act is an opportunity to allow the public to gain access to information at a state agency or a local government or any level of government. So this allows them to gain access to public records. The act makes all documents public. Records, documents, as long as they're official business, they're open to the public. There are some exceptions, but again, with transparency, the act makes everything public. So this includes any electronic communications that are transmitted, received, or maintained on any device. So this isn't just papers. These are the emails that we send. These are text messages. These are phone records. These are all public information as long as they are connected to public and official business. Again, this is construed liberally because they want to make sure that the public has the opportunity to access information. So what happens when we get a public information request, an open records request? When we receive that request, then it is forwarded immediately to our Office of General Counsel, to our open records team, and they are fantastic because they've got to work quickly. We have a 10 business day response time. So in getting these thousands of requests a year, they have to work quickly to be able to respond. So they get those requests, they work with our staff, ask for the responsive information, and get that information out to the requester. We are not able to ask somebody why they want the information, but we can ask them clarifying questions. They may ask for something really broad, or they may not give us enough information to let us help respond to that question. So we can go back to them and ask a little bit more information, but we will never ask somebody what they need it for. So there are some common exceptions or exemptions to disclosure. So like I said, everything is open, but with some exception. So date of birth, email addresses, some email addresses, certain education documents, and of course HIPAA, those are things that we will redact. So we will make sure those are blacked out before they are released to the public. So that is it. That's a really quick nutshell of Public Information Act resources for you, as well as open meeting and rulemaking. Do any of y'all have any questions? All right, I will see y'all with the rules.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on, we do not have any public comments, so we're going to move on to agenda item G, staff reports. Ms. Lisa Hodak.
Good morning, Chairman, board members, and welcome to our new board members. And thank y'all for being on the board. We appreciate that very much. So I'd like to start out with saying that I have 3 new employees. I'm very excited to have them on my staff, and they are Crystal Hall. She has 15 years experience with Sears Holding, where she provided administrative support, customer service, and also technical assistance. Kate Nauert has over 7 years of experience, and she worked at Gerling Community Care, where she maintained client files, managed and scheduled field supervisors, and performed background checks. Gerald McLeod was a recruiter where he matched veterans with Fortune 1000 employers, and was also a site manager where he audited invoices and employee timekeeping reports. He was also with the Air Force. All 3 of them are doing a really good job considering working through the pandemic situation and everything, but they're all just performing really well. So I'm very proud of them. Happy to have them on my team. The statistics for the auctioneer numbers, as you can see, there's a slight decrease in the new licenses issued for fiscal year 20. The renewed licenses issued jumped a little to 1891 for fiscal year 20. And then the overall population, a slight decrease at 2259. The associate auctioneers, there's a slight decrease from fiscal year 20 to 19 for new licenses issued. Renewed licenses, there was also a slight decrease at 44. And the total population was at 74 and is now at 72 for fiscal year 20. This is the normal information that I provide on my report, but I'll be happy to provide you with any other information at future meetings. So please reach out to me or any of the TDLR staff if you have anything else that you would like to be informed of. And that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to staff report customer service. Ms. Jacqueline Rush, please.
Good morning, board members. This is Jacqueline Rush from Customer Service. The statistics that we provide for you include the amount of calls and emails that we receive for your industry, And so you can see the statistics before you. I can tell you a little bit about the kind of calls that those represent. For the most part, the calls and emails are going to be folks reaching out for application instructions, renewal instructions, license status, folks coming in and out of the state who are needing to confirm the process for getting their license in Texas. Auctioneers leaving the state who are needing letters of certification, which we coordinate with our licensing team, clarification of laws and rules. And they also call us for assistance in renewing their license. We're happy to take credit card payments over the phone. Auctioneers can do that themselves, but some people like that personal touch, and so they're welcome to call us. One of our agents can assist them in renewing. And so that concludes my report on the emails and phone calls that we get. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
Our next is enforcement. Mr. Michael Shirk.
Board members, good morning. My name is Michael Shirk. I'm one of the prosecutors here with the Enforcement Division. The work that we do, of course, spans all of the programs, and the Auctioneer program is really interesting, and I wanted to pick out a few highlighted cases to show the kind of work that we concentrate on. And what's, I think, really fascinating is how many of the complaints we receive are consumer driven. But I'm gonna start at the beginning of the report. I'm sorry to make you scroll around. We have some personnel updates, and much like Lisa's report, you see the great length of service people put in here at the department, because I think we know we're doing good work and we're supported by the advisory board members, the commissioners, and it keeps us here, and I think creates an institutional history that really benefits all of our programs. John Medlock was just recently promoted to chief prosecutor. He had been here for 7 years, serving both as a prosecutor and as a senior prosecutor, and then moved to the chief prosecutor position on March. To fill the senior prosecutor position, Trevor Thielen was moved into that opening. He's been here for 9 years, so it's a lot of ongoing institutional history that carries forward. Jackie Revilla, who's been working here for 18 years, just was promoted to legal assistant supervisor. Debbie Hawkins, who's been here for 8 years, was moved up to the position of legal assistant in the enforcement division. We did lose a couple of outstanding staff members. One of them was our investigations manager, Greg Dodson, who had worked here for 22 years and really put together a strong investigative unit. We totally believe it's going to stay equally strong. Also, the legal assistant manager, Daryl Kuntz, retired after 18 years of service. We had one retirement also on August 31st. Senior investigator Ezra Arroyo retired after 21 years. And the one omission from this that I want to make a shout out to is that Denise White, the legal assistant who's been working with me a few months ago, was promoted to senior legal assistant after working for TDLR for about 6 years. And I think that speaks to really the climate and the commitment that your staff have in doing this job and doing it well. I'm going to move over now to page 2 of 5, which are the statistics. And I don't want to make your eyes jump around too much, but if you look at the pie charts, what I'm fascinated by, because I work in other programs, is how many of the complaints are consumer driven. A full 80%, which is significantly higher than generally our intake clientele, which I think speaks well of us that we are accessible to people when they feel that the auctioneer laws and regulations have not been complied with. And that's the most important thing we can do, is be responsive to our citizens. Sorry again to make you jump around with your eyeballs, but some of the statistics at the top, they speak for themselves. You can see that the cases opened with 25, small percentage to the entire TDLR caseload, but the cases closed with 36, which is impressive because we're closing more cases than we're opening. So it shows that we've got a good cadence going on in this program. We've resolved 16% of the cases by within 6 months, which is, I think, a function of the investigation that has to go into the auctioneering work. The people have to be interviewed, the financial information that has to be gathered. We've already covered the pie charts, so I'm going down to case outcomes. And there's a number of ways that cases can be resolved. Once a prosecutor has made a decision, there's sufficient basis to move forward with the prosecution, which is a very serious choice. There's lots of ways that we can resolve cases, from informally to formal commission orders. We didn't have any commission orders. Commission orders stem as a result of a contested case hearing in front of the state office for administrative hearings. None of our cases required us to actually go into contested case hearings, which are basically civil trials, adversarial proceedings, requiring us to put on proof, evidence, and they're burdensome to the auctioneers and they're burdensome to the citizens. So if we can work out solutions which benefits everybody, we really go in that direction. So one of you'll notice that we had 3 agreed orders where everybody just agreed on the resolution. We had 2 default orders. Now, a default order is an interesting creature because the first step the prosecutors take in moving a case once it's been referred from the investigators is to send what we call a notice of alleged violation. And it basically says, we believe there are sufficient facts to show that this rule or this law was violated. We send those notices of alleged violations. Once we confirm that delivery has been obtained, we give the party, the respondent as we call them, 30 days to reply to us, either to accept the settlement offer that we've made or to request a contested case hearing. We're always in negotiations with them. Default orders occur when they simply do not respond to the department's notice of alleged violation. At that point, your executive director is authorized to issue orders imposing administrative penalties, monetary penalties, or sanctions against the license itself, which of course includes the revocation or the suspension of a license. We collected $7,000 in administrative penalties. We collected $3,000, which is, we're almost at 50%, which is pretty standard for TDLR. We did revoke 2 licenses for criminal history, and one of the cases I'm going to be talking about was a revocation based on criminal history. And at the very bottom is the informally resolved. Whenever we can come to a resolution with a respondent that is satisfactory with the complainant, we like to go that way because we feel it gives them a chance to show that they can operate in compliance with the law and still make some money. They don't have to cut corners to make a living, and comply with the law is always in your best interest. Informally resolved sometimes will involve a refund or terms that they're going to comply with, maybe getting supervision or monitoring in the way they perform their work. So as a total percentage of the cases that TDLR runs, Auctioneer is one of the smaller caseloads, but I think that's because people know what the rules are. And of course, I think auctioneers are very highly scrutinized, being out in public as they are. A lot of our licensees kind of do things without such visibility. The next page, which is page 3 of 5, tells you what the primary or the most significant violations have been. And of course, the biggest one is failure to pay within 15 days. And then a close second is the flagrant misrepresentations and false promises. Criminal activity, again, that goes to our criminal history department, where if they find that somebody, either in the course of an application or during a renewal, has the sort of criminal history that would bar them from having a license as an auctioneer, that's when we will revoke or deny a license because of criminal history. You see the top violations resulting in disciplinary action for fiscal year 2020, and I always have to be reminded of this, so I'll just remind everybody the fiscal year that we're talking about is September 1, 2019 through August 31st, 2020. Again, it didn't pay within 15 days. That is something that we seem to be getting lots of, but the nice thing about those cases is that the seller generally will come around and try to make restitution. I'm going to move on to some of the case highlights, and I try to select representative cases so you get to see a little bit of all the different ways that we prosecute cases, the kind of cases that come into us. In the first case with Mr. Roman, an agreed order was issued. And remember, an agreed order is where the auctioneer, who's been in violation of the rules, agrees to a penalty or sanction. And those are very effective because they pay the penalty and they comply with the terms because they recognize they made an error and they want to get back to business and do things the right way. Mr. Roman was assessed an administrative penalty of $1,875 for failing to remit funds. Unfortunately, even though we did get an administrative penalty against him, there was no recovery from the Auctioneer Education Recovery Fund because there was no written contract for that transaction. On page 4 or 5, Mr. Baker, we were able to move and obtain full restitution for the citizen under the Auctioneer Education and Recovery Fund for an auction that was conducted in 2016. The amount of money that was wrongfully withheld was not in dispute. So by order of the executive director in 2019, the full $15,000 was restored to the citizen, the seller, through the recovery fund, and that money was paid to the seller in January of this year, January 2020. So these cases you see do take time. This one was an auction conducted in 2016, but full restitution was made in 2020. The process works. It just, we have to ensure that everybody's due process rights are protected and that the investigation is accurate, that we're working on good facts and financial data. The following case is Monty Fitzgerald. An administrative penalty of $1,125 was assessed against him for failing to pay the seller or the consignor within 15 days. In this case, the administrative penalty was assessed and the full administrative penalty was collected. We have the next case, what I was talking about earlier, the criminal history conduct that can result in the denial or a revocation of a license. Mr. Yeaman had his license revoked because he had pled nolo contendere to criminal conduct, which falls within our criminal history guidelines, disqualifying somebody from working in the field of auctioneers. He was licensed as an auctioneer in August of 2013, but then when he sought to renew in August of 2019, he stated he had never been convicted or placed on deferred adjudication for anything other than a minor misdemeanor or a felony. We always run a criminal history background check and determine that at least one deferred adjudication had occurred prior to his date of renewal. And so based on his misrepresentation of his criminal history status to the department in his application, the department moved to revoke his license. An agreed order was entered there because when a license is denied or revoked for anything, including criminal history background checks, they can always reapply after 1 year. And that past 1 year will be looked into to ensure the person has been
Mary Winston, TDLR. Michael, you are muted. I think there's a delay on your button.
I think I'll just talk over the mute button.
Okay, okay.
Then the last case is Robin Casper. Again, this is a default order that was issued by the executive director on February 20 of this year. The allegations were continued and flagrant courses of misrepresentation in 2016 and 2017. The license expired in 2017, and a total administrative penalty of $4,000, which was $2,000 for each of the instances, was assessed, but no portion of the administrative penalty has been collected at this point. That wraps up the written materials that I've prepared for you, but I'm happy to the extent I can to answer questions, or as was offered before, if there's additional information you'd like presented in the future, please let me know or any staff member, because we want to make sure we give you the right information so that you know how to steer and guide and direct your activities.
I have a couple questions, if you got just a second, please.
Yes, sir.
This is Rick Stroud. Is there any information on the cases that these people belong to a state association? And are there any statistics on whether they're, I just lost a word, where they're out of state and haven't state and has Texas reciprocity? Is there any information that all these people in Texas, or are they out of state and have a reciprocity license? And is there any information on where they have any ties to their state association or our state association or anything like that?
Yes, sir. We do not keep statistics on state associations. And as for the reciprocity, we haven't gathered that data. Are you asking about somebody who's obtained an auctioneer license through, say, reciprocity with Oklahoma or something like that?
Yes, and then, yes.
Yeah, that would be more in line with the licensing division, who knows how people get their licenses or by what means they've become licensed here in the state of Texas.
Okay.
But if they have a license, to be very blunt, if they're practicing in Texas under Texas authorization, we just prosecute them. The licensing divisions are the ones who decide whether or not they've got sufficient basis for reciprocal licensure with their home state.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi, this is Justin Adcock. I have a question. Excuse me. Could you go into detail and explain how the administrative penalties are calculated?
Yes, sir. The administrative penalties are generally, they arise out of what we call our enforcement plan, which is available on our website. And the programs have penalty matrices. We classify the severity of the violation under numerical alphabetical system. So say, for instance, somebody engaged in a very low-level violation, a violation that had no discernible consumer harm, let's say a record keeping or responding to a request for information. That might be a Class A. The prosecutors are guided by a range within the Class A that they must stick to, except in exceptional circumstances, in which case we can seek the Director of Enforcement's authority to go higher than would otherwise be allowed. And the purpose of a penalty matrix with the classifications is so that there's uniformity of enforcement for the same wrongdoing, right? So if somebody engages, fails to pay within 15 days, we have a range that we can look at. Excuse me one second, let me get my paper. So we have in the enforcement plan, all the prosecutors have A, B, C, and D. D being the most severe, warranty and a penalty up to $5,000 and or license revocation. A is generally starting at about $750 to $1,000. In order that two people who've done the same thing get the same penalty from two different prosecutors, we use this enforcement plan to ensure that there's uniformity, that somebody doesn't just wake up on a bad morning and decide to hit them with a high penalty. There are a number of factors that guide our discretion in whether to start at the lower end or the higher end of any one of the classifications, in the A, the B, the C, each of which has a larger range of penalty options for us. And probably the most important one is recidivism. Here at the department, we only look back 3 years. So if, for instance, there's been an agreed order against an auctioneer 2 years ago and a new violation is proven, we would move towards a higher end of the spectrum to reflect the fact that this person really should have been more careful and knows that we will prosecute. So to sum up, we have an enforcement plan. It guides prosecutors and limits our discretion, and it also classifies the violations in levels of severity based upon the input we receive from the advisory board as well as commissioners and working groups. Not that we write that ourselves. Did that over answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yes, Douglas? You're muted. You're muted, Mr.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Michael, thank you for that detailed report. I have a couple of questions that I simply don't know the answer to that you might be able to help. So one is, do all of the administrative penalties collected go into the education and recovery fund?
No, sir, I don't believe they do. I think that they go to the general fund, but I can check on that right now while we're speaking.
Okay.
I was correct. Yes, sir. All the funds that are collected by penalties are going to the state general fund.
Okay, thank you for that. So the Education and Recovery Fund, is there a special assessment at the time of license issue or renewal that funds that account?
I'm just looking up the answers for you in my. You know what it is? It's the licensing fees that those people who get auctioneer licenses, part of the licensing fee goes to support the recovery fund.
Okay, a portion of it is a designated portion by rule.
Well, what we do is we change the amount of the licensing fee dependent on how much the fund is underfunded. And so, as you probably noticed, we do everything we can to keep licensing fees low. We've even lowered them in a number of programs, but we do change the amount of the licensing fees for auctioneers depending on how much the recovery fund is underfunded.
Okay.
Mr. Olmixon, I'm going to pause right here. Mary Winston,
Yeah.
you are giving Michael a run for his money in enforcement, but he's doing fantastic. It's just something that he doesn't necessarily because he's correct. It's part of licensing. And if we want to, we can actually give you more of a presentation on all of that. But we can give it to you offside, or we can give it to you the whole board. I think it's a great way to, be educational for the whole board, and
Sure.
we can do that. But we will not ask Michael because
Okay.
Michael is just doing enforcement. So, but you did great, Michael. He went, did fantastic. But I'm like, oh, this is out of his purview. But we can definitely get information on exactly which line item it comes out of and how we, create it, what rule, what statute. So I'm making a note for the future with that one. Okay.
Okay.
Popping back to mute now.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that very much. But I do have two questions that Michael should be able to answer fairly straightforward because they're part of the enforcement function. And one is, does the department have the authority to negotiate restitution as a condition of an agreed order or the imposition of an administrative penalty? In other words, I know you don't have it was clear that you didn't have the authority in one of the cases that you presented that you couldn't get recovery from the Education Recovery Fund because there was no written auctioneer service agreement. So that's kind of a prerequisite for that. That seems fairly straightforward. But can you negotiate as part of an agreed order during the investigation and negotiation process restitution as a condition of an agreed order? Is that something you have the authority to do?
Well, of course, as you mentioned, if there's a written contract, there's the recovery fund. In my experience, yes, you can negotiate any settlement that you want, just about, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, with the respondent, the license holder. So we in the programs that I work all the time, we might say, okay, we're going to enter an agreed order. We're going to reduce the penalty that we seek against you. We're going to probate the revocation of your license so you're still in good standing, but you'll make a commitment of restitution by such and such a date on such and such a payment plan. Once the license holder signs off on that, then that gets turned into an agreed order by the executive director, and a violation of that could serve as the grounds to pursue a license holder for violation of an order of the executive director.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, just because the very first case that you talked about today, the Roman case, you had kind of that situation where the administrative penalty of $1,875 was collected, but there was no restitution available to the complainant, to the consumer, that client. So I just wondered if you had the authority to condition those, and if that's a regular, practice. If not, I recommend that perhaps you consider making that a regular practice.
That's an excellent point, and the department's goal is to protect consumers.
Right.
And restitution is always, considered as one of the outcomes we get. Money going to the general fund is great, but if we can make our consumers whole, that's great also. And I think that's an excellent point.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the last question that I had has to do with the Yemen case. So hang on one second. Let me get that back on the screen here. Yeah, the Chad Eric Yemen case. And so Mr. Yemen misrepresented the fact that he didn't have either a conviction or a nolo contendere on some felony or whatever. And you guys actually, let's see, you entered into agreed order revoking his license and then allowing him to reapply for 1 year. Do you know what the criminal offense was? I mean, other than he misrepresented that there was a criminal offense or a plea, do you know what the substance of it was?
I do not have with me right now the notes about what the offense was. I would be happy to go pull that case up and come back online if you would like me to.
Yeah, I think it'll be. I think it's relevant to our later rule proposal discussion. Very relevant.
Okay, I will do that. We're bound by statutory language about the kind of criminal misconduct that must result in revocation.
Right.
But I think what I'm going to do now, if it's okay with the chair, is I will sign off, go take a look at that case, and I'll let Mary know when I'm ready to address your question.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Mr. O'Mixon, Mary Winston here one more time, and I want to thank Della Lindquist, our Deputy General Counsel, on your question referencing the fund. If the balance dips below $350,000 per Occupations Code 1802.153 is when we look at changing what that cost is going to be to the licensee. So it's in 1801 in Occupations Code, and at a later date we can dive into that more. I just wanted to give you that. Since you did ask the question, I wanted to give you a little information.
I appreciate that because I figured that there was a minimum threshold that's fairly common for this kind of fund.
Yes.
But I didn't see in the statistical reports a report of the number of claims made on the fund and the balance in the fund. I think that might be a regular report that would be useful to the members.
And that is a good call. Again, Michael Shirk is not going to give you that because that's going to go out of there. But he's been wonderful, and I see he's raising his hand to give you more information. So I think he may have some more information on those cases that you requested. That would come from probably from Regulatory Program Management or our General Counsel's office. But we made a note, and we also have this recorded for posterity of those requests, and we can get those items added to the future reports.
Thank you.
I will just wrap up my time. I did get a note from the prosecutor who handled that case that the Yemen case involved a misdemeanor offense of indecent exposure.
And it was a misdemeanor.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you very much.
and I'm available. Yeah, the Noah contendere was an indecent exposure. I will be on this if you have any further questions for me. It's been a pleasure appearing in front of you, and like everybody else, thank you so much for your public service.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda is the education and examination. Mr. Michael Strawn.
Good morning, Chairman and members. My name is Michael Strawn. I'm a manager for the Education and Examination Division. First part of my report this morning is regarding examination statistics. If you'll notice in front of you, our numbers are very similar to last year, within 1% of our total pass rate, or 1.5%. And then our total number of exams administered is extremely close to where it was last year. You will notice, if I can bring your attention to the second quarter of this year, you'll see that April had 0 examinations done, and March and May were both at 3, which was lower than our other months. That was due to our COVID shutdown in the state. So March 13th, we went on a COVID shutdown. This impacted not only our business, but our exam vendor as well. So March 13th, they closed, and we reopened on May 28th. So that's why you'll see that during that time period, there were no examinations given. To scroll down to the next page regarding the course approvals, again, very similar numbers in line with last year, so it's holding steady, and we don't see anything there. You do see in May, kind of the same thing due to COVID. There were no course approvals for that month. However, it picked back up, and we ended up being in the exact same space that we were. Regarding the COVID shutdown, as we go into it, it was a hard time for us as a state in a response, but our staff here at TDLR worked diligently with our vendor to create additional testing capacity. As you know, we were opened at 25% and 50% and 75%. But when you're shut down for almost 3 months, that creates a huge backlog for testing and examinations. So we worked with our vendor to bring online 14 additional testing sites, bringing us to a total of 37 in the state. And we've been running at that capacity since that time, and we are now up to 75% testing capacity at most testing sites where they can maintain a 6 feet social distancing requirement as part of the CDC. We're always working with our vendor to create more and more additional testing capacity, testing times, bringing out additional features, looking at new technologies that we can still capture and allow people to test without potential infection at this time. One of the other things that we've worked on recently, and we saw for September, was the release of the new study guide. It has been a very long time since we have updated that, and I want to thank Jessica Escobar for a lot of her hard work on that. Would not be released in September 1st when it came out without her help, without all of her diligence to make sure it's right, it's correct. And the statistics you don't see on here is that in September we've now tested 2 people, and both people have passed, so we have 100% pass rate for September on our current statistics. With that being said, that concludes my report, and I'm open for any questions that you all have for me. Thank you.
Is there any questions for Mr. Strawn? Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on to our next agenda item is regulatory program management. Mr. Russ Tolley.
Here we are. Good morning, Chairman and board members. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
I'm Russ Tolley. I'm the program specialist. I serve with Latasha Poland as program specialist for the Auctioneer program. We work under the supervision of Stuart Stenard, who is the RPM BCS manager for our section. Our section does not keep statistics or case highlights. We do, however, do outreach. However, due to the COVID crisis, there have been no outreach programs for the past period. We do handle the day-to-day questions that customer service can handle, and we serve in other capacities as needed. That concludes my report, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Tolley? Thank you very much, sir. Moving on to our next agenda item is the executive office. Mr. David Gonzalez, please.
Good afternoon, Presiding Officer Stroud and board members. I am David Gonzalez, Deputy Executive Director of Licensing Services. I'm one of 3 Deputy Executive Directors helping to provide Brian Francis a little bit of backup, some help with the executive responsibilities. We have 40 different programs at TDLR, and I think he appreciates just a little bit of the help. I'll be providing the executive report this morning. A lot has happened since our last meeting. It's been a little while, including a world-changing COVID-19 pandemic. I will provide you a summary of our COVID-19 response. It's hard to summarize the past 7 months, but I'm going to do my best. As you might imagine, the safety of our staff and the public we serve has been prominent in our thoughts and actions. As with the rest of the nation, in regards to COVID, we're still learning as we go. So the easiest way to summarize is to divide our response into 2 general categories. First, our external response to the public. Our main TDLR webpage has been the main information outlet for our COVID-19 external communications and actions. We've pretty much been serving as a conduit of information from the feds, the CDC, DSHS, Department of State Health Services, governor's executive orders, and then also local government jurisdictions like the counties. Everybody's issuing their guidance based on the information they receive. We get executive orders from the governor. We have to review them and decide how does that affect each and every program, and what information can we push out to our licensees to provide them guidance and help them along. We've been doing the best we can, and it is drinking from a fire hose during some times. Reviewing the recommendations and directives, responding timely regarding those orders, and also to the plans to reopen Texas, trying to take all the input from the governor's plan to reopen Texas and make sure we get the information out. We did things like halting inspections and investigations for a time period. For those elevated counties that had lots of COVID positive testing, we may have reduced our presence there, but kept it going in other areas where there wasn't high numbers of COVID. So we've had to do different things with our field operations and inspections and investigations. Obviously, we've halted or at least significantly curbed our outreach efforts. If it's something virtual, our staff can actually still help out with things like that. But if it's something that's in person, we're going to be looking out for the safety of our staff first. And we haven't been doing the trade shows and industry events that we would normally do. So that's just a general idea of what we've done to provide external communications. Most of it's on our website, our main page, COVID-19 response. That's the best place to get information related to anything related to the information we're pushing out to the public. Then we have an internal response. So in mid-March, when we had to make a decision on what we were going to do, executive leadership decided we would do all we can to keep our staff safe while maintaining our work productivity. Executive initiated a work from home directive for all positions that could perform their jobs from home. Unfortunately, that did not include all of our staff. Many of our staff, like finance and licensing staff, they still had to come in to open mail, to scan documents, to review applications, because they couldn't do 100% of the work from home. So they remained on the front lines, having to open that mail and scan those documents and review those. Overcoming the challenges has been, again, a learning process. We've done everything from rotating schedules, the dispensing personal protection equipment, isolating people into workspaces so they could maintain their distances. We've done temperature taking, social distancing. We have a check-in app where people sign in and take their own temperature and let us know how they're feeling those days. We are not immune to the effects of COVID-19. We've even had some individuals at our agency contract it, and we've had to go to the sanitation process of certain areas, work areas, to ensure the safety of our staff. It's been a real challenge. Meanwhile, we're continuing to conduct our work. I'm so proud of our staff for their efforts, and it has not been easy. They've had to take care of all these things while schooling from home or take care of loved ones. I want to give some special recognition and kudos to the efforts of our IT division. All this stuff, including meeting, doesn't happen unless we familiarize ourselves with WebEx or Teams, the Zooms. Everybody's coming more familiar with conferences. In fact, I spend my days in a meeting discussion, and that's not a bad thing. If we can get our work done and it allows for that interface, then it's a good thing. Also need to give a shout out to our HR division, human resources division staff, who've had to field all kinds of scenarios and special situations for our staff related to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. There's all kinds of situations and relief that's been provided at the federal level, and we have to hear their stories, try to see how it works with our needs for getting the work output, and do the best that we can to keep them safe and make sure we're still doing our job as public servants. So that's just a very brief overview. Do you have any questions related to our COVID-19 response?
Any questions for Mr. Gonzalez on the COVID-19 response? Thank you, sir.
All right, so I'm going to move on to strategic planning. Those of you that have been here for a while, we take our strategic planning pretty seriously at this agency. If you're familiar with our process, we would travel the state of Texas, go out and meet with our customers, shake hands, and ask them to share their genius. We pride ourselves on doing pretty good work here at TDLR, but the secret to our success with our strategic plans is really that we gather all the ideas from the public that we serve. The strategic planning process is actually a state mandated process, happens every 2 years in between legislative sessions, and it lets us get prepared and again steal all the good ideas that our public has been challenged with throughout the years. We put those ideas together. We put it together in what our director calls our game plan. He's very sports oriented. So if you wanted to look at TDLR's game plan, you would go to our website under agency reports and look at our strategic plan, because it's going to give you our priorities for the next few years. We take the process seriously because every idea that y'all share with us has been something that we can either take to the legislature and say, hey, our customers are having problems with this. We could use some help in this regard, whether it's a legislative fix or a rule fix. These are things that we need to hear from the public. Some of our best ideas came straight from those meetings. We didn't get to do it in person this year, though. We did it all virtually. We have a Poll Everywhere app that we utilize that allowed for everybody to hear Brian Francis and I ask the same questions we've always asked, which is, if you were king or queen for a day, what rule or statute would you change? If you could make things better, is there something we can do better? And we also asked a new question this year related specifically to the pandemic. How can we do a better job? The input that we received was fascinating. We also put all those questions on our website so that we could get input from those people that couldn't attend the virtual strategic planning sessions that we held for the entire agency. We allowed it to come in through our website. So we put all that together into our strategic plan. Most of our goals for strategic planning has always been to streamline processes, to make things more efficient. This year, a couple of our priorities include things like making sure that we are responsive to this pandemic and any other future disasters. Another high priority on our list for the next few years is going to be implementing whatever comes out of the sunset process. I'll get to that later in my report, but that sunset process has been delayed for us since 2002. We've had so many programs being transferred to our agency, so much growth, that they kept on pushing back our sunset review. Other agencies had theirs, and it resulted in us growing in size. So that strategic plan is a very good read. It's important that you hear it once again that we're going to try to focus on implementing sunset reports, streamlining some of our processes, and making things easier for the public, and also anything related to disaster response and pandemic. If there's no questions on the strategic planning process, I'm going to use that to lead into the legislative appropriations update.
Go ahead.
All right, so the money is important. We can only charge the amount of monies necessary. We can only charge license fees necessary to cover our cost. And it's very important that we have those monies. Now, this legislative session, as many legislative sessions, we've been faced with budget crunches. And this recent request was a 5% budget request that came from the governor's office, looking for us to tighten the belts a little bit and see if we can't cut the budget by 5%. We've selected to keep some positions unfilled. We've got some salary cost savings because of our travel expenditures. We haven't been doing as much travel, so that's reduced some of our expenditures. We've canceled furniture and equipment purchases. We've done a lot of things, including our executive director taking a self-imposed salary reduction to try to tighten our belts to make sure we can satisfy leadership's call for being frugal to meet our budgetary requirements. Now, we've done this because state's in a budget crisis. We've had some pandemic COVID issues, businesses not accumulating all the same sales tax we've done in the past. But we've done this at the same time that we were growing as an agency. In the last legislative session, they actually gave us 2 new programs to implement. Fuel Motor Quality Program and the Motorcycles Program came over from Texas Department of Agriculture and from DPS, the Motorcycles Program. So while we're trying to tighten our budgets, we're also trying to implement a couple of programs that were pretty significant, a lot of complexity. In fact, we're still in the midst of implementing the requirements for FMQ. It went into effect September 1st. But there's still some programming and coordination that has to be done behind the scenes to make it all work and flow as best it can. The legislative appropriation request is us asking for money to do our business. There's an administrator statement that explains how we're going through this process and what we're considering. But it really comes down to just what are we needing our money for, and are there any exceptional items? So the exceptional items we're asking for this year are significant. We actually were approved for a Texas licensing system, the funding to pursue a new Texas licensing system. We have currently 9 unrelated licensing systems at our agency, trying to do all the work of our 40 programs, keeping them together and getting the work output. We think it would be much simpler and much more efficient to do it in one, and we got approved for quite a bit of monies during the last legislative session, but it's not done. We're going to need some more monies to finish. So that's our number one request as an exceptional item, is actually continuing funding for pursuing a Texas licensing system. That Texas licensing system would allow for us to take over, instead of just the 77%, which we're looking to do with our first iteration, it would allow for us to do the other 33% of our programs, or at least a very large portion of that. And if we can't actually prop it up with this new licensing system, our staff, our IT staff, would learn from the third-party vendor, Red River, who's actually providing this new Texas licensing system and working through it with us. Our staff has been phenomenal in providing the input and the necessary user stories to make this happen. But during phase 1, we're getting these bigger programs like barber and cosmetology, massage therapy, electricians, some of our largest programs. We're getting those taken care of. The funding for phase 2 will take care of some of the other smaller programs, our towing programs, driver education safety. And mind you, these aren't very small programs, but they're smaller than the bar cause numbers. And so we're going to be focusing on that and requesting that funding for phase 2 so we can continue with one Texas licensing system and hopefully get all the other 9 disparate systems transferred. So that's a big deal for us. We're also going to be requesting funding for 3 military licensing FTE positions, which were frozen in response to the requested 5% budget cuts. So it will allow for us to consider military applications coming from other states It'll allow us to put in a licensing permit specialist to do that work and best serve the military who they kind of want to be able to have portability of license and move from state to state. We can do a better job if we have the additional staff that we were counting on to get that work done. So also throw some of the positions that were going to be necessary to implement the motorcycle ATV operator safety program, that program that got transferred this last legislative session from DPS. We're going to be requesting the funding for 3 of those positions so that we can get that work done. We've done a pretty good job with staff we have working with TEEX and TTI and DPS to get all those things transferred, but there's still work to be done, and requesting those positions would be very helpful for us to focus on the things that are most important. Exceptional item 4, we want to gain access to grant funding that would make a lot of money available for more education for public safety. We thought we had access to those monies, but apparently monies is out there. It's being accumulated in the piece for that program, but it wasn't given specific statutory funds, and we're hoping to actually request those funds as well. And then lastly, an exceptional item to take care of historical knowledge and institutional knowledge. As people retire, you heard in the the enforcement report, we've had some 22-year tenured veterans in our agency, lots of money on their retirement. And so we're going to be asking for exceptional items, get those monies for those planned retirements when we can. I can take care of a lot of people.
David, Mary Winston here.
To retirement. Yes, ma'am. Uh-oh.
You are breaking out a little bit, or your voice is cutting up a little bit. I think we've been able to follow pretty much, but it got a little choppy near the end. I know you were talking about the retirements, but it was a little choppy. And we, of course, will have this information available for whoever wants it following. But sometimes when you take a little, let's see how it's going now. Let's try one more time, David, to pick up and see how we're going. Okay, now we cannot hear you. Oh, come on.
I'm talking now.
Okay.
All right. So, sunset report, probably one of the most critical things y'all are here to listen to. Our sunset process hasn't been done since 2002. They came in September of last year and started. They rolled up their sleeves. They embedded themselves in our processes and have issued their report in June. Now, this is the sunset staff's report. This is not the agency's report. That sunset staff report still allows for public comment. If you go to their website, the www.sunset.texas.gov, there's still opportunity to provide public comment. I suspect most of y'all are aware that they have a recommendation to deregulate Auctioneer's program. Now, this is not a done deal. This is Sunset staff's report. Their report will be presented to the Sunset Commission, which is made up of 5 senators, 5 representatives, and 2 public members. They will present that to the Sunset Commission, and it can be amended. They can take up all, some, or none of the recommendations, and whatever they decide to do would still have to be put into, during the legislative session, a bill to be put into law. So there's opportunities to affect the Sunset staff's report, and I would encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities. The input of our advisory staff has been so critical to our agency's success and bringing up issues of concern, things that we need to hear, things that the Sunset staff need to hear. I would encourage y'all to take advantage of those opportunities. We were actually scheduled for a September hearing for our Sunset, but because of COVID, they pushed back our hearing. They did hold a hearing on September 23rd with some other agencies. If you wanted to get a view on how that worked out, you can actually go to the Texas House of Representatives and listen to that sunset hearing so you can get a feel for how they're taking public comment. They were doing a blended version, a digital and in-person version of the sunset process. With as many programs as we have, it's going to be interesting to find out how they decide to move forward with ours. We still do not have a date for our hearing, but we expect, according to their schedule, it'll be sometime between now and January. As soon as we find out, we will make sure that all of our agencies, all of our programs find out what that date is, so y'all can participate if y'all'd like to. Any questions related to the Sunset Commission's report?
Any questions for Mr. Gonzalez? Please proceed, sir.
And then communication outreach statistics. Angelica, if you can help me by putting those up there on our shared screen, please. So we pride ourselves on pushing information out to the public. The use of our web pages is the most effective way for us to know we're getting information out to the public, and how many hits we get on each page tells us if we've got valuable information. So over the past 6 months, from April to September, the Auctioneer's website had 17,207 views, an average of 94 per day, 43% accessed from a desktop computer, 55% via smartphones. A lot of people doing their business just on their phones, and we're trying to accommodate that. The information that's getting the most hits is frequently asked questions, auctioneer schools, auctioneer law and rules, and then forms and publications. If there is any other information, then we could do a better job by posting it in a certain place on our website, by putting the information that we maybe should have out there and we just don't know about it. Let us know. We're looking for that feedback so that we can improve our website. And although we love interacting with the public, COVID times are hard. If they can do self-serve, if they can go to our website and get all the information that they need straight from our website, we'd like to accommodate that. That's all I have to offer with the executive report. I think if there's any questions related to any of the items I've reviewed, be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Ms.
Mr.
Mary?
Stroud,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to let Mr. Omixon go before me because I'm backtracking. Mr. Stroud, I believe it was you who had one of the questions from the enforcement report, and our licensing manager, Lisa Hodek, has taken the time in the background to kind of look up that information. So, Lisa, are you on? If we could maybe just get this little bit out of the way, and then Mr. Omixon can continue back because it'll be really, really short.
Okay.
Okay, there's Lisa. If that's okay with you, Mr. Stroud.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Please do.
Yes, hi, this is Lisa Hodek again with the Licensing Division. And I was following Rick's Enforcement Division presentation. And I was able to look up the individuals that there were cases against. And I just wanted to let y'all know that all of those were in Texas and none of them were reciprocity. I believe that was your question, Mr. Stroud?
Yes, yes, ma'am. That was one of them. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And Mary Winston again, TDLR, sorry for the interruption, but that was it. We just wanted to make sure you had that information before next meeting. So
Yep.
I know Mr. Omixon has questions now. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez, I had a couple of questions that you may be able to answer. I guess the first one was I noticed in the Sunset report that Auctioneer and about 7 other smaller programs are recommended by the staff for elimination. Has there and I apologize for not knowing this already, but has the department already filed its response to the staff report?
So the answer is yes, we have provided an executive response.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No.
David, we can hear you. It's just so low. So maybe if you can turn up your microphone.
How about now?
It's a little better.
All right. So our executive director provided a response. It's actually the very first response on the public comment. So if you go to the Texas Sunset Commission's webpage and look up licensing, Department of Licensing Regulation, you'll see all the public comments. Our executive directors is at the very top. Just so you know, we are a state agency that has to enact whatever the Sunset Commission decides on. So we've taken a neutral position basically not commenting on item 2.2, which is the one under issue 2 on y'all's report. I would recommend y'all familiarize yourselves with those items. We are not addressing it because if they decide to move forward with legislative action, that's when we're going to have to do something about it. I will tell you that there are public comments that have been offered. There's opportunities to attend the hearing as soon as we find out when that is. You still have an opportunity to have an effect on the Sunset Commission's decision on taking up some, all, or none of the report recommendations from Sunset staff. So I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Mixon, you are muted.
Okay, I'm back. All right. Second question I had was on the exceptional items for the license for the new Texas licensing system. So last LAR you received, you said, substantial funds. Can you tell us how much that was approximately?
I don't have those figures in front of me right now, but I can definitely get those to you. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I'm like I'm at a kids thing. Louder, sweetie, louder. Sorry. Just a little louder. Okay, sorry.
I don't have those figures in front of me right now, but I can get those to you. It was for phase 1. This is actually going to be a 2-phase project where our greatest hopes. So phase 2 is what we're hoping to pursue this legislative session to get the rest of our licensing programs moved over into that new licensing system, the TLS, Texas Licensing System.
Okay, and then do you know how much the phase 2 exceptional request is for?
Because I am not the numbers person and I would hate to give you the wrong number, especially on the record, I would defer and get with our numbers people to make sure we're giving the exact right number. We should be able to get it to you shortly, though. I'll look it up behind the scenes and see if we can't get it to you before we close this meeting.
Before we're done. Okay, well, I appreciate that because I know licensing systems are, one, they're not cheap, and you guys have a more complicated one than anybody else. So I expect those to be pretty substantial numbers. The last thing that I wanted to remark upon, ask a question about was on March 13th, when the COVID shutdown order came and you sent everybody home, did you have sufficient technology available to you to keep your call center, your communications center, those folks who respond to the calls from the public, to get them distributed and routed in a way that allows those people to continue to work?
Yes, sir. It's a great question. And I'm so proud of our customer service division and our IT service divisions because they were looking ahead. We have a we're in an enviable position for a lot of state agencies because our call center does exactly allow for that. People to be able to work from home, continue their business. So customer service was not the challenge. It's some of the other divisions that require that mail and actual opening checks. Those were a little bit more difficult, but the customer service, yes, routing phone calls. Now, the challenge is when they call our customer service division and they want to find out about their licensing application, where it's at in the process. If we have a backlog on mail, whether it's from the U.S. Post Office or from our own internal mail processing system, that's a more difficult challenge because now our customer service division can't see that piece of mail and find it in the routing process. So that has been the real challenge. We have someone there to answer the phones. Can they give a response that satisfies the customer? That's been the biggest challenge. And we're actually working on the technological solutions for that as well. We're exploring how we can have all that information available online and tracked online, which we have for some of our programs, some online renewal processes. We just don't have it for all 40 programs. That's what that new Texas licensing system will accommodate for us. It'll get us closer to having more online renewals and online tracking of a status update on a licensee's application or renewal. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, and thank you. And when I knew that you had a very robust customer service system, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to toot their horn a little bit. And the licensing system, of course, feeds that. If everything came in digitally, that'd be a whole lot easier to find that information and answer those questions. So the last thing that I wanted to ask is, do you track average call hold times when people call? Because I saw the volumes listed in the statistical reports, and I know it probably, I'm not asking for it just for auctioneer related calls, although we did get the volume for that, but general hold time for calls into the customer service center. Have you been able to improve that with dispersed service?
Yes, to answer your question, we do have that capability to track it for each day. It fluctuates on a daily basis. When we have, let's say, a new fuel motor quality program come on board on September 1, the call volume goes up. You can think a couple of weeks beforehand and a couple of weeks after. And so our staff are able to track actually to the very minute what the turnaround time and what the hold time is for each of our customers. So yes, we do have that capability.
Mr. Omixon, you're muted again.
I think if you don't talk for a while, it just automatically mutes you. That's a good thing. So, David, I apologize. Now you're muted, but I want to ask you one other thing. Do you have like an average? Are you tracking regular average hold times, and can you tell us approximately what that is? I mean, is it 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 12 minutes or what?
I don't have that off the top of my head right now, but I know my staff can get it for me relatively quick. Jacqueline was just on earlier. I'm sure she can find that number very quickly. I will tell you, there have been times in high call volume days where it has been over an hour. There are some times that it's less than 5 minutes. In fact, that's most of the time. But when we have a backlog of things going on because of a particular new program, it can get pretty high depending on what programs are up for renewal and what issues they're having. Our massage program has had some challenges with new fingerprinting requirements and new student requirements, having them to have to register. The call volume went up, and there were some turnaround times that were not what we would like them to be. We've had to actually put an all hands on deck to help with our licensing division, our finance division, to get those licenses processes, renewals process, so that we don't have that call volume going up so high. But our staff do the best that they can. And I'm hoping Jacqueline's working behind the scenes to see if she can give me an average time, at least for today, and see if we can get that to you.
Thank you, sir.
I
Appreciate it.
wanted to add, if I could, David, because this is honestly one of my favorite divisions. I'm an enforcement girl by heart, but our customer service folks work so hard. We will literally because Jacqueline, Trey, Twan, I mean, everyone is working so hard. If the times go up, we'll literally get a message saying times have gone up wait times up, getting it down. They stop, drop, and roll. They find out what the problem is on why that wait time is what it is, and then they fix it. And then we have so many different types of calls that come in and types of questions that come in. And it's a continual tweak that's made, not just weekly or daily, sometimes it's hourly. So I know Jacqueline can get some statistics for you. Do you want hold times for auctioneers specifically? Do you want hold times overall? They have this wonderful board there, and of course they're still in the office. We do have customer service folks who have always worked remotely because of the system that we do have, and we do have folks that are in the office socially distanced and so forth that handle coming in and that alternate, because this is a function that we really keep up with because we have so many licensees and we don't want to disappoint anybody. So Mr. Omixon, which type of statistic, because I know David's folks are out there trying to figure it out for you. Do you want something for just auctioneers? Do you want something from a time frame? What would you like?
Yeah, so overall, just trend analysis, I think it would be helpful and instructive for the advisory committee members, just to know how the agency's doing overall and watch obviously the first of the month and the end of the month, typically there's all kinds of spikes in that, but average across the board. And then if you are able to break it out by auctioneers, well, that would be even better.
Okay, let's see what we can do.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Oh, and she just messaged and she is working on those numbers now. Thank you.
So
Any
if
other questions?
I can actually give you an answer right now. I'm looking at it in the chat if you have a moment and if I'm not breaking up. So an average hold time in the last 5 weeks was 11 minutes. Now that's for the entire agency and all the programs. Last week's average hold time was 10 minutes. And let me just tell you, I love all of our licensing service staff, but for them to be able to bring up these numbers as the questions are asked, it's just so satisfying because y'all deserve these answers. The public deserves these. We try to put the information out on another thing that we put on our webpage, like our enforcement statistics, things that we think you're going to want to know. But we may need to look into having this information on our website as well. We'll have to explore that as well. Let me see if there's anything else that she was able to offer. So yes, in the past 5 weeks, it's been 11 minutes average hold time. And I have some numbers to give to you regarding the licensing system. So I don't have the phase one numbers yet, but for phase two, we're going to be looking for about 1.6 million over the biennium 2022 to 2023 to continue and finish out that contract. That will allow for us to get our framework built to do most of our licensing and train our staff for those programs that are so unique that we're going to have to do our own custom work. So the third party providers giving us the bulk of the licensing system framework and build out. We're going to have to do some work on the back end, but with 1.6 million in the phase two is what we're looking to. I'm still looking for my numbers on phase one. I should have had that up and ready, but I apologize for not having it.
Mary
Thank you, sir.
Winston, Mr. O'Mixon, I don't think you're ready to retire. I think you need to jump back in and run another agency. Is what I believe needs to happen here. No, I'm good. Full disclosure, Mr. O'Mixon was my boss several years ago, so I'm just pulling his leg. So yes, one great thing about it is we're steadily getting this information, and thank you TDLR family and team who are working behind the scenes to get everything that's asked of us. I do want to let us know that it appears we've lost Mr. Beasley, and that just is for our records and for our minutes. We still have a quorum, but we are down one member. I wanted to get that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is any other questions? Thank you, Thank you, David. Thank you very much for that information. All right, moving
Rick,
on
I'm
to,
going to step away for just a minute.
okay, let's take a little recess, please. We have at least 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
That puts us around, how about Mr. Stroud, 11:50? Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez has got the numbers for phase one for Mr. O. Mixon. Let him continue to speak and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chairman Stroud, board members. David Gonzalez, TDLR. So the phase one numbers for the biennium was 1.9 million. That was for our ask for the new Texas licensing system for phase one. So over the 4 years, it'll end up being about 3.5 million total when it's all said and done. They've been making great progress. Our staff has been really working them hard on getting all the user stories and getting the stuff done. And our vendors been very patient with us and actually very insightful. They've done this work before and it shows in what they're doing. So very excited about this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for that quick response. I think we're ready to move on to our next agenda item, item H. This is discussion and possible recommendation on the proposed amendments to the existing rules at 16 Texas Administrative Code 67.20 regarding the auctioneers program.
Good morning.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No,
Good
no.
morning again, Chairman and members. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see what these edits look like. So these rules, these are proposed rules to section 67.20 of the Texas Administrative Code related to licensure requirements. These rules are brought to you as a result of legislative changes last session for to Senate Bill 1531, and these Senate Bill 1531 removed restrictions that prohibited someone with a felony conviction within the last 5 years prior to the application date from applying and getting a license as an auctioneer. So these changes only remove that as required by statute. And so I'm bringing these to you today with a recommendation that you vote to propose these for publication in the Texas Register. And I'm available if you have any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Escobar?
Mr. Presider, Mr. Stroud?
Yes.
Yes, I have a question. So I actually looked at 1531. I was looking for the impetus behind this, and what you're saying is that 1531 is broad enough. It didn't just remove this from. I mean, there's a whole bunch of podiatry language in there, but this particular provision is across the board. There's no longer can TDLR require the absence of a felony conviction or consider the presence of a felony conviction for any period at all as relative to whether or not someone gets a license. Is that truly the case across the board? There's no more criminal history considerations across the board for all license types?
So I'm sure that Mr. Shirk would also like to jump in at some point, but that's not entirely the case. So it doesn't prohibit somebody from applying. I think that's the key here. Previously, what the statute said is that you could not apply at all if you had a criminal conviction. Now, even though you have a criminal conviction, you can apply. That does not mean that you're going to get a license. We still have tools within Chapter 53, I believe it is, that allows us to evaluate your application and determine whether you would be eligible for a license. So it goes through that. We also have criminal background checks, and so a determination can be made that an applicant is not eligible for licensure for other reasons besides that felony conviction, or they may determine that that felony conviction is a sufficient reason not to license somebody.
Okay, so this specific rule If repealed, well, your recommendation, staff recommendation is it actually has to be repealed because the statute already makes it ineffective. Okay, so that now that leaves us only with all of the general tools that are found in Chapter 53 that have to do with criminal history consideration in a licensing context, including in the disciplinary context, correct?
Correct, that's right. This is a statutory requirement, so we don't have discretion in not implementing this rule change. We
Yeah.
are required by statute, but you do have a lot of tools at your disposal for our enforcement division to review these applications with other options.
Okay.
Mary Winston just providing backup here because your boss Dell is providing backup to me because you can't see her while you're speaking. Yes, we still have teeth in Chapter 53. This is a requirement that we have to incorporate. However, it does not remove our teeth. It just changes the way we may be able to do something as the legislature required this change. We still have that ability to go in and to assess, and this does not limit us to not being able to consider criminal history at all.
Okay, so having dealt with this at other agencies, as Ms. Winston ratted on me, informed everyone. They're actually really good tools in Chapter 53, but isn't there typically a reference somewhere in the licensing rule for the particular license type? I think there was an older previous. It was actually reiterated in the same session last legislative session, that required an update on the relationship between the kinds of criminal history, the kinds of criminal offenses, if you will, and how those specifically relate to each license type. So obviously, if auctioneers hold money in trust, then someone having converted or conducted fraud on trust accounts or whatever, those kinds of things, the theft of property, those would be kind of directly relevant to the trust that's expected by a license holder in an auctioneer context. Is there anywhere in the rule where that connection is currently made? Is there a rule that actually that lists the kinds of offenses that would be taken into account for licenses? Obviously, something like a DUI doesn't necessarily have any relationship to conducting an auction, but it might bear a great relationship to a tow truck driver, right? Something like that. So is there somewhere in the rules, is there a table that provides that kind of correlation that the statute requested?
So I apologize, Mr. Oldmixon. This is a new program for me. I just joined it in October of last year. Mr. Shirk, I see, is thankfully joining because I don't know the criminal conviction guidelines for this program, but I'm sure he has some fantastic information for you because it is not in the rules, but it is probably in those guidelines to answer your questions.
And Mary Winston here, TDLR. Michael has reappeared. He was listening, but he's gotten back on camera. And this is a question, Mr. Oldmixon, that goes back to enforcement. And actually a wonderful time to just mention and they don't really know about our conviction guidelines and our processes that enforcement uses. We have things in the website. I'm not going to steal all of his thunder, and I'm thinking that for a future meeting, we may want to have a presentation on enforcement because the backbone of providing those guidelines is our advisory board. So when we came up with what level of a violation it is, if it's administrative, if it's more serious, A, B, C, D. Our advisory board members help us make those criminal conviction guidelines published on the website. I'm getting pinged by all of our enforcement folks. Yes, the criminal conviction guidelines are published on the website for your viewing pleasure. Also, I think it's always great for us to go over them with our board. It's not on the agenda today, but it will be coming up. But I think Michael has some things he can provide some insight. Are you shaking your head? No, Michael. You're muted. Give me 1 sec. Okay.
We have what are called guideline crimes that are relevant to the nature of the work for each kind of licensee. One of the factors taken into account whether or not a certain crime would be considered for disqualification is whether the person has access to cash in the course of the job, or whether the person has access to somebody's home while there might be people at home. I'm just going to reassert that yes, we still have teeth. All this did was remove the automatic prohibition of somebody applying for work because they had a 5-year-old felony conviction. What it requires us to do, and this is really the modern trend in licensing, is to take a more individualized look at a person. What have they done in their last 5 years? But we do have certain guideline crimes that for each kind of license will cause us by statutory mandate to commence proceedings to revoke or deny a license for specific crimes. This just gets rid of the blunderbuss of automatic disqualification, which is oftentimes inequitable. I don't work on a criminal conviction history division, but I just wanted to clarify those little tiny points.
Thank you. That's very helpful to get the background on why that appears to be completely taken out of the rule, but in fact, Chapter 53 still applies, and there are significant, meaningful, and relevant, I guess is the right way to put it, guidelines that this body has the right to opine upon that will help determine whether or not someone gets a license that has a criminal history. So I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
And Mr. Olmixon, I've just gotten a message, Mary Winston here again from the Director of Enforcement, and he has assured me that a review of all of this, the criminal conviction guidelines, penalty matrix, we have some new members here, and he's like, yeah, we need to put this on a future agenda, and we will, because we want Mr. Schrader. I see you're shaking your hand. We have some folks, and you need to know that. So today, Jessica did give open meetings training, open records training, and Public Information Act, right? Administrative Procedure Act training. That was from our GC division, and this sheet is in writing the rules. And actually, the person that are the folks that would go out and deal directly with this would be our enforcement division. And again, we want our advisory board members to know we have new folks. I don't think they know their input in all this because it comes from y'all. So Ron Foster, the director of an enforcement division, has just texted like, yeah, we're going to definitely get this on the agenda. So thank you, Mr. Omixon.
You're welcome. I'll be quiet now, Mr. Stroud.
You're all good. This is all good information. Is there any, Justin?
Yeah, this is Justin Adcock. Who ultimately decides whether that application gets revoked? Is this a committee decision? So it's, or somebody flags it and then it goes up the chain of command. Could you just briefly touch on the process of what goes through, revoking that application to where they don't get a license? Thank you.
Mary, would you like to start with this? Again, if it's criminal conviction guideline crime that we believe disqualifies somebody for the sake of protecting our citizens from holding a license, or whether it's the kind of prosecutions I take where we have a licensee who's broken the law or broken our rules, the case goes in first instance to an administrative law judge. This is a judge over at the State Office for Administrative Hearings. That's an executive branch agency, not a judicial branch agency. And he or she, pursuant to the formal rules of evidence and formal rules of civil procedure subject to cross-examination, during which the department bears the burden of proof to deny or revoke somebody's license, will hear the evidence, review the law, and then he or she will issue what's called a proposal for decision, because this is an administrative law judge, and only the commissioners have the right to make final agency action with respect to somebody's license. The proposal for decision issued by the administrative law judge will come out maybe 60 to 90 days after we have our trial. It then goes to the set for a public hearing in front of the commission, at which time the licensee or his or her attorney appears. One of the prosecutors will ask the commission to either adopt, reject, or modify the recommendation that the administrative law judge makes. The administrative law judge makes a recommendation only. That's why it's called a proposal for decision. The administrative law judge makes findings of facts and conclusions of law. That is forwarded to the commissioners. It's then set for hearing to give the licensee plenty of time to attend and make argument why the commission should or should not adopt the recommendation of the administrative law judge. After that, after the commission has issued its order, the licensee can file a motion for a new hearing. But ultimately, that decision, if the licensee is dissatisfied with it because it imposes too much money, or it revokes the license, or it denies the license, will be heard at the district court here in Travis County by a full-fledged judicial branch officer rather than an administrative law judge. So there's lots of due process, and it's a time-consuming process, but it ensures absolute fairness, and it's not one person making the decision.
That's very helpful. Thank you. It does seem like it gives the applicant due process, so I appreciate the explanation.
And I wanted to confirm, Mary Winston, that this is not Mr. Adcock, and Michael, thank you for giving such a thorough explanation. It's not something that staff says, you are revoked. That does not happen. Recommendations start internally, and that applicant has a chance to answer and provide documentation. It can then move up to SOA, and there's a proposal for a decision that a SOA judge, State Office of Administrative Hearing judge, writes up, and that goes to our commission, as Michael was saying, and then it's heard by that full body. So there is a process, and it's not just a denial.
One question, Rick Stroud. Is there any stats on how many people with criminal background or records that's applied for anything and has been turned down or has been accepted?
Mary Winston, we do have those stats. I don't know them off the top of my head. Let me try to get those for you, because we have prepared those stats for various reports we've had to do to the governor, the ledge, and various folks. So, Mr. Stroud, let me try to get that for you, because we do
You
have
bet.
statistics
Thank
on
you,
that.
Mary. While you're waiting for that, do we want to move on? Any other questions? Maybe I'll ask that first. All righty, no other questions. So I'm kind of at a stop here. I guess we can move on with what we need to do on the motion to approve. Is there a motion?
I make a motion.
Yes, sir, Mr. O'Mixon.
Well, Mr. Adcock jumped in there, and so let him make the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Adcock.
I make the motion to approve.
Okay. Is there a second? Thank you, sir. I missed you. Is there a second?
I'll happily second the motion to approve this proposed amendment to the rule.
Okay. And Angelica, I think it's your turn.
All right, sounds good. Mr. Rick Stroud, presiding officer.
Yes.
Mr. Mark Schrader.
Yes.
Mr. Douglas Oldmixon.
Yes.
Mr. James Beasley. Mr. Martin Pesink.
Yes.
And Mr. Justin Adcock.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All righty. I guess we'll move on down to our next agenda item, and thank everybody, if you're still listening, thank you for all that information. Let's move on to our next item, recommendations for agenda items for our next meeting. Anybody any of the board members, recommendation items? Now's your turn to get them, and then Helica will list them. Anybody, please speak up.
Mr. Stroud, so this is Doug, and I think Mary probably got them all. She's very thorough about this, making sure that we got the training items that were suggested or responsive to particular questions. So she has them. Then I don't think I need to enumerate them again.
Mr. Omixon, feel free to enumerate just to make sure everything's caught. We
Okay.
do, staff does take minutes as well as we go back and review, but please review them. And I do have the statistics on our criminal history denials and revocations and so forth. So after you give that, I would love to give those statistics. Thank you, Chris Russi.
Well, let's see. Okay, I'm still on. The two things that I asked about that I thought would be helpful to have included are potentially for the statistical reports that are regularly given. So customer service hold times, trending customer service hold times. On the, let's see, I already talked about all the dollars. That was not an issue. Eligibility, revocation, sorry. I have lots of notes. Well, then on training, talking about the complaint handling process. So the enforcement, from when a complaint comes in, how it gets handled, the criminal history implications, because that's just one category of a complaint, but how that criminal history process works, so that we can weigh in on whether or not the current guidelines are adequate or reflect our perception of what should be related to the duties of an auctioneer. The other statistical thing that I thought might be helpful is with respect to the education and recovery fund. So the number of claims and the amount of claims paid, that kind of thing, just on a routine basis whenever we meet between the last time and this time, an update on that, or even if it's just by fiscal year, something like that, I think would be helpful. I think that's all that I had specifically requested.
Okay, if it pleases the board and Mr. Stroud, I do have the statistical data that was requested from our analyst in enforcement, Mr. Chris Russi. And I'm going to give you a bit, and I really see this as a indication that we do need some training because we do have new members, but I also want to be responsive to the questions that are asked. So in Auctioneers, the total licenses issued, this is through June of 2020, was about 2,031 for Auctioneers. Applications that were referred to enforcement, out of that number, 27 were referred to enforcement. And that gives out of those referred, cases were opened with it. There was something here that upon further review and enforcement that indicated that, yeah, we feel like we need to hold off on issuing this license. We need to have a hearing. Of those cases, those 3 cases that were open for further consideration based on crimes that committed, so forth and so on, information in the application, 2 of those licenses were denied or revoked, and I think we mentioned that today. And that's about 10% in auctioneers of those cases that were actually referred to enforcement. But overall, for all of our licenses, those licenses denied or revoked, we have a percentage of literally 0.05. Most folks, if they apply having their qualifications, and most folks do get a license. Some of them are those numbers. Auctioneer is not one of our largest programs, so those numbers are going to differentiate per program. But overall, for all of the, almost 1 million licensees that we have, about 0.05 are denied or revoked. Go through that process, Mr. Adcock, that Mr. Shirk was going over. And at a future meeting, our enforcement division can kind of go into that a little bit more, explain to you how the advisory board comes up with the process of assessing penalties and violations and where we go from there.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was very helpful. Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll just move on then. Discussion of date, time, and location of next board meeting. Is that Angelica or is going to? Any recommendations?
Mr. Stroud?
Yes.
So I guess the question becomes, on the rule that was approved for recommendation today, the amendment, does that have to go to the full commission then before it is published? Because the next time that we should have to meet is to, if there's any public comment on that rule, not that there will be, since it's kind of a pro forma, but we would have to meet if there was another action to be taken, unless all of that happens at the commission level. That's what I'm just not sure of. Perhaps Mr. Gonzalez or someone else from executive. Oh, Jessica.
Miss Jessica's here. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, all. Jessica Escobar again. So we do need to reconvene as a board, because regardless of whether we get 15 comments or 0 comments, we want to meet with y'all again to let you know that fact and let you know that we're ready to bring the rules to the commission. So we do meet again before we go to the commission for adoption. So the timeline that we're looking at, so we're looking at probably more or less sometime after the holidays to meet again with y'all. So that's kind of what I would keep in mind after the new year, as far as the dates you're thinking about. That way we have time to submit these for proposal. We have time for our 30-day comment period, and we don't get tied up with the holidays, because as you can imagine, people go on vacation. We don't want to tie you guys up with your families. So we're looking at probably after the new year for the next meeting so that we can discuss the rules.
Okay, thank you. So I guess then is it appropriate then just to say after the first year, we would get with everybody like we normally do and then schedule a date?
Yes, Mr. Stroud, Angelica will reach out to the board and poll the board for generally 2 to 3 possible dates, and we will get a consensus from there.
Okay, thank you. Just before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Mary and the whole TDLR staff, I got a lot of respect for you guys. So if there's no further business or questions or anything, then I will adjourn the meeting, and it is 12:20 p.m. Thank you, guys.
Board members, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Angelica. Thank you, everybody.